Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Legendarium podcast. Today is another Author's Shelf episode, one that I'm pretty excited for because we have returning guests, Sharon Lee and Steve Miller, and I gotta say, you might be the quickest returning guests that I can think of in a long time, so I'm really pleased that you guys came back so soon. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. We're pleased to be here.
And last time you were here, Sharon and Steve, we talked about space opera as a concept and as a genre, and what questions kind of arise when we consider it as its own genre, separate from science fiction and all of that. So people should go check out that episode. Partly because today we're talking about one of your favorite space operas. I don't know, maybe we can get into how we classify this book, but we're going to be talking about Hellspark, or is it Hellspark, or is it
Hellspark? Yes.
So we're going to be talking about Hellspark, the book by Janet Kagan. This is a 1988 novel. And Sharon, you pointed out to me that she's something of a contemporary of yours because the first Liaden book came out in February of '88, and this one just a few months later. So we will talk about Hellspark, but before we do, I just want to remind everybody to go to thelegendarium.com, check out past episodes there, check out the calendar with future episodes, links to Discord, links to Patreon, and if you are listening to this before February of 2024, then there's also an RSVP page for our 10th anniversary meetup happening near the Salt Lake area.
Wow.
If any of you listening are able to make it out, and you have friends on the Discord server or whatever, you should come out. It's going to be an amazing weekend. All right, with all of that out of the way, Sharon and Steve, we're talking about Hellspark by Janet Kagan, and I'll shoot you the first question that I ask every author that comes on the author's shelf, but I'm going to set this one up. The question is, why did you choose this book? But it always elicits an interesting answer, right? But if I look at the cover of the latest edition by Baen, you have blurbed this book. And so right at the top of the front cover, it says, one of our very favorite novels in any genre. If you have not read Hellspark, you must do so immediately. It's that good. Sharon Lee and Steve Miller.
Right.
So you've already answered my question with a nice blurbable version, but let me ask you verbally, why did you choose this book? Why did you want to read this one?
Because though we write together, our favorite books don't always overlap.
They do in this case. But
in this case, it's like, this is a great book. We both think so. Both of us like Georgette Heyer, but within Georgette Heyer's oeuvre, we have different favorites. I like The Masqueraders. He likes The Toll House. I ask you, how could you like The Toll House? But this one is, we both agree, and I'm pretty sure we agree for different reasons that it's a great book.
Interesting. Well, okay, let's start with you, Sharon, then. Why, when we reach out to you and say, hey, we want to do an author's shelf, you can pick a book that is interesting or influential in some way. It's important to you in some way, and you choose this book, Sharon. Why would you say, I want to do Hellspark? Why is it that good to you?
Well, for one thing, I think it's overlooked. It came out in 1988. And speaking as an author whose first book came out in 1988, there was a lot of science fiction being thrown out at that point in mass market paperbacks, $3.95. They were cheap. They were easy. And I mean, this cover. Who's going to buy this cover? What's it about?
This is the original 88 cover of just kind of a generic spacescape.
Spacescape, yes. And it's not at all. I mean, yes, it's space opera. It takes place sort of in space. It takes place. It's about people. It's about people. It's about how we get along. It's about how we don't get along. It's about how our cultures separate us more than almost anything else. Our preconceived ideas that are baked into our language. I mean, it is a really remarkable study of culture and how people can get past their culture to get along.
Yeah. I mean, you say language, and one of the things that that this book hammers home is that language means so much more than the words you speak.
Yes.
It includes that, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but there are so many little things that we do that communicate non-verbally. So I remember when I was working as a banker in Seattle, I had a lot of folks opening up accounts who were coming in as Amazon or Microsoft employees from India and China. So I worked with a lot of these clients, and it took me a little while to figure out that the Indian clients that I had were not shaking their heads at me. No, they were they do the head wiggle that it's kind of a yes or a nod or a
Go on,
continuing
go
the
on. Yeah.
conversation. You go on. And I was like, why are they always shaking their heads at me? It took me a minute to figure all that stuff out.
I used to
Um,
work. I used to work in a modern languages department at a university, and I have actually seen people. Janet talks about dancing your language, and I have actually seen people going from English to Spanish. You go from English to Spanish, you step closer because
oh,
a
right.
Spanish speaker wants to be close enough that they can touch you. You go from Spanish to French, they step back.
Yep.
It's really marked, and she did a great job.
That's fascinating. Well, let me kick the question to you then, Steve. All right, so we know what Sharon thinks of this, but why would you pick this book?
Well, partly it's from the personal connection. We knew Janet, and I had known her, in fact, longer. I'm pretty sure than Sharon, and I had been involved in conversations at conventions where some of these topics had come up. Some of the things that filtered into Hellspark, and it was good to see her voice showing these things in a lot of ways. It was good to see that she managed to grab that, and her Hellspark came out 6 months after our book, after Agent of Change, and we covered some of the same topics, actually, if you want to use the difference in cultures and how people misread, and which makes it a fine example to use with Georgette Heyer, because she frequently used the misread word, the misread understanding, the misread, and but Janet was using some of those same things, but she wasn't after drama. I'm trying. How do I want to put it?
Comedy.
Yeah, she wasn't after comedy, and she wasn't after cheap drama. She was after the kinds of things of people being extremely involved, and the characters in the book relate to each other incredibly well, and that was part of what she was doing, and that was part of what we were trying to do. Sharon will tell you. In fact, she did tell you, I'm pretty sure, that one of the things that drove us when we were writing the early Liaden books in particular was to make sure that there were love interest. There was something that was romance, and it wasn't just people wandering around shooting things.
And not even just romance, just connection between people.
Janet did a lot of that. Hellspark was a great example. There's something else in the book that dates us. It dates me. It dates Sharon. It dates Janet. And she mentioned it in the I think in the afterword that's in the Misha Merlin book. I think that it was left out of the tour information. A number of things were left out of the tour book, but the afterwards in Hellspark in the Misha Merlin edition includes an afterwards for Uhura song as well, because she wanted to get one of those in different. But the thing that she was mentioning was some of the books that she was considering her sources, and that includes Edward Hall, The Silent Language, Audrey's Territorial Imperative, and these are nonfiction. If you go back that far, these were important books. These were books that were striking the heart of the young academic and the
And the young science fiction writer.
The young
yes.
science fiction writer and young science fiction, and to some extent, young science fiction readers, outlining the problems that culture causes on its own. And so the territorial imperative, which has been somewhat poo-pooed in later days, made people think a lot. And so these kind of discussions were going on, and they were very popular at science fiction conventions. 3 beers in at 3 a.m. The discussions could get wild and hairy, and I think that's part of where Janet got
Hellspark. And that's part of the feel of the culture clashes in Hellspark. People coming in and saying, well, of course you know what I mean. Well, of course I don't know what you mean.
Right.
I'm acting like a human being. Why aren't you? And one of the illustrations that Tokol gives, and Tokol is here we go, once again. She's wearing a second skin. She has a moss cloak, and she has spectacles where her computer can show her things off of her spectacles. So she is very technologically advanced, and she once went to a place and she asked one of the natives, what's the difference between you and this animal? And he replied that the animal doesn't know when to replenish the fire. And she said, well, I would fail that test because my second skin keeps me warm. My spectacles, if it gets dark, will lighten things so I can see it. So clearly I'm an animal. I would fail the human test.
It's a fascinating question that you can come across in almost any academic discipline, whether it's artistic or scientific. What is it that makes us humans, and what sets humans apart? Are we simply animals, or are we of some kind of higher order? And if so, how and why? And it's as you kind of illustrate, it's one of those barstool questions that can take you well into the night, and many drinks later, you're still trying to puzzle this out, right? But it's no less fascinating a question for that.
Can I give a little background for the readers who are not intimately familiar with the book already?
I was going to do it. I appreciate you doing it. Yes.
Okay.
Please.
Well, I'll try a little bit. Hellspark takes place on a planet, and is it Lynette?
Flash fever.
Flash fever is the planet, but okay.
Lasti.
So, Lasti. Okay. See, that's it. There are so many points being raised on where are we, who are we, etc. It takes place on a planet where there are creatures who may or may not be sentient or sapient, and it takes place where somebody has been called in because there's been a murder. They think there's been a murder. They're not sure there's been a murder. There may have been a murder, and they need to call in somebody who is an expert from outside. And this is the setting. The setup is already one where you have an outsider who's coming in who is powerful. That is, the woman who is coming in is a Hellspark.
Our main character.
Yes, that's Tokol, and that with her, she brings a lot of training, a lot of information, and she understands when she arrives and sees a situation where there are perhaps 40 people on the planet, 40 humans on the planet, and almost every one of them is from a different group. They're all from different planets. They don't...
All different cultures, even if they're from the same planet.
And their culture is held together by a language, a galactic linguist.
Gowling.
It's sort of held together that way, and it's held together in theory by a common goal. And so it's
very important at this point to say that Tokol is not a policeman and she is not a detective. She's a linguist. She's a Hellspark.
And yet, the way the book unfolds, I kept thinking, what if Inspector Poirot were a woman with spectacles in space, right? Instead of a mustache, it's the glasses, and she's in space, right? so it does function as a murder mystery with a detective, even if that's not technically her job. Yeah,
it does, and the presentation. In fact, Sharon mentioned that Toko wears a second skin, and all of the humans on the planet are wearing second skins. The second skins give them all kind of protections that you and I won't have, because we're not able to have our second skin help absorb the impact of a branch that swings and behind somebody or that kind of thing.
Or
so
keep
the
you
second
warm or
skin
cool
is
or
a
whatever.
very interesting technology, and we have to remember that, or we can remember, if we want to get a feeling for the era, that at the point that Janet was writing, you could not get glasses for your computer that projected onto the glasses information. Now, I know people now who have glasses that they can use with the little holo things that shoot the information up on as they heads up displays and things like that. But Janet was using fairly forward-looking technology for 1986. When
it took her 5 years to write it, so in the 1980s.
And so she was using very forward-looking technology, and she used it well. She made it a natural part of the story, too.
And they have computers. But one of the things that endeared me this time, as I was just going through it to refresh myself, was that someone wants to plan a decorative planning. He's going to landscape an area, and he rushes off to get a pad of paper and a pen to sketch it.
Oh, right.
Yeah, there are.
It makes you wonder, some things never change. Would this be one of them?
Well, maybe.
It's tough to say.
So the world is, we do not see a great space battle. I'm sorry. I'm sure that's an unfortunate mistake on my part to tell people, and there are no great space battles in this. That doesn't mean that space is not referenced, but it does not take place per se in a place where you're swinging around the spaceship.
Space is in the way almost.
Yes.
Because
it's one of those things where, as I was reading through this, it's almost I felt like I was reading a purer science fiction than, say, something like Star Trek. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is because it took me a while to get my bearings in the book. And this happens with a lot of speculative fiction, right? You're world building, you're introducing people and places and things that the reader has never heard of. So it's going to take a while to get your bearings. But when you have something like Star Trek, you're given these characters like, what's his name? Jim Kirk. Okay, my name is Jim Kirk, and I went to the academy in San Francisco, and I may be in space, but I'm your earthling. I'm your vehicle into this story, where we don't have any of that. It's you're totally unmoored.
The deep end.
Yeah, exactly. You're totally unmoored from any Earth experience or names, for that matter. And so you're given all these names and titles and a dozen different cultures that you need to at least be somewhat familiar with as you're going through the story. And it's so when I say a purer distillation of sci-fi, I just mean you don't get any of those helps that you often do with others, where there's an earthling off spacefaring, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
It's fair. A lot of, you're going to wander off now into how you do novels. Back in the day, throwing people into the deep end was how it was done.
Mm-hmm. A lot of fantasy writers do that now. So.
Okay, and you figure it out as you go along. Mm-hmm. Television, the visual stuff still tends to give you a way in, an easy path in, and part of that's because it's visual. And people have sort of come to expect that in novels. They want to know everything before you tell them, and you can't do that.
No, right. It just struck me as we were speaking that, in a way, Janet prefigures and again was a contemporary of the early C.J. Cherryh, who did a lot of those kinds of things with her stories.
Until she started with Foreigner, and then she gave you the most naive narrator she could and just eased you in for 30 books now. You're
still being eased in, yes. But again, she did that any number of her books, even in the quote unquote same universe, effectively. Cuckoo's Egg, for example.
Oh, yeah. The ones that are told from the alien's viewpoint, you're on your own, pal. Figure it out.
It's a similar approach to the story. Of course, we were telling around the same time. We were trying to tell stories that were romance and partnership, action adventure. That was our intent, and Janet was exploring other things, including the entire question of communication and how do we communicate, and what is a communication.
Oh boy, there's a question for the linguist in me,
and there it is. And what is communication? If you, I have been in restaurants where the waiters got mad because the silverware either was used or wasn't used. It just sat there. They had no respect for the dish because they weren't using they're using the wrong spoon or whatever. And they had no respect for the. Well, no, I mean, you get there and you're hungry and you never had this stuff before, and you pick up the nearest and use it.
Utensil, yeah.
But there you are. That's already a culture clash and a thing. And
one of the they're all interesting, but one of the more interesting characters in Hellspark is Swift-Kalat, who is a man who cannot lie in his own language. And it makes him very upset to think about lying in another language. So he has some silver bracelets. He's a very reliable person. He has all these silver bracelets to testify to how reliable he is. And very, very methodical. But there are things that he can't figure out how to say in his own language because he doesn't know they're true. Not that they can't be true, but he doesn't know that they're true, and there's no way to read it.
Yes, and that's part of the deal with his particular language. It says, I can tell you this with absolute certainty. I can tell you this because I believe this from my own information. I'll tell you this. It is the information. Yeah. This information has been passed on to me by somebody who is 80% reliable. So I consider this to be a 60% reliability since you're hearing it from me. And that kind of thing goes on with him. And Swift-Kalat is not his name.
It's his title.
It's his title, and there's
his description. I think.
Right, there's a lot of that where when Tokal introduces herself, if it's a culture that uses titles versus names, then she'll introduce herself as the Tokal, kind of turning her name into a title so that person is more at ease with the introduction. Right,
Lele Kalalun, the shaman, is very into names, and that's. To know somebody's true name is important.
And very intimate, right? And when you first open the book and you turn before page 1, you get past the title page, and then there's the what's the word I'm looking for? What is the word I'm looking for?
Here he comes.
The paragraph, the pre-chapter paragraph at the very
prologue.
Beginning of the book.
Oh no, the orthography.
The orthography, thank you.
The note on orthography, right.
The note on orthography, where she tells you about that character specifically.
Right.
You could read it as, well, because this character is very important to the book, and she is. But it's also a way for the author to say, here's what you're getting into. Yep. I've given you this character, but this is a title, not a name, and that's going to be important. And you have no context for that, so as a reader, you don't care about that character and their name or their title or whatever. But
actually, I think
it gives you a little.
It is fair warning. If you're looking at that in a bookstore and you go, okay, no, I can't cope with that, and you put the book down.
What are you talking about? Names and titles.
Some people surely did. And other people said, whoa.
Okay.
What is this about?
Yeah. Well, hey, that's the beauty of books, isn't it?
That's it.
So let me switch gears and talk. or I want to go back to the question of who is a human, or who is a human, who is a person, what is
Right.
a
You gotta be
sentient
careful.
being?
Yes,
That's the word I'm looking for.
we've
Yeah,
written
yeah.
26 books asking this question.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. It's not the word isn't human, but what counts as a sentient being, right? And let's go ahead and spoil the end of the book. Okay, so if anybody's listening and you haven't read it and you're interested, go read it, because in the end of the book, the murder mystery is unsatisfactorily ended, in a way. In one way, it's satisfying, and it
prove it.
Right, exactly. At the end, she sits in judgment, and basically it comes down to, yeah, you probably did it, but we can't prove it. Let's move on to the more important question of whether these alien beings on this planet are sentient or not. And then it comes out that her robot assistant now should qualify as a sentient being, this AI. And boy, is that relevant now, isn't it? So this is a scene that I want to talk about in a couple of different ways, but let's talk about the AI aspect of it first. Have you guys thought about this and where you come down on the question of does AI count as sentient, or could it like at some point?
We have enjoyed discussing AIs for many books, and the question is is in part, do the current algorithmic programs qualify as AIs? And in fact, they probably don't by our standards of an AI, because
that would be science fiction standards,
which is which are things that are self-determining. Unfortunately, the Forbin Project. Do you remember the Forbin Project?
I don't.
D.F. Jones, isn't it?
D.F. Jones.
Or it's the equivalent of. I'm sorry, this is another spoiler. I think it was Asimov's story where they're trying to research the possibility of God, and they've built the universe's best computer, and they ask the question, is there a God? And the answer in that story is, there is now.
Oh, yeah, I remember that now.
Yeah, okay. So, but that's self-determination, and the AI programs that they have now are running on information that's fed to them, and they're sucking information out of books and out of sources.
They're not making their own decisions.
They really are not. They're working on. They're not determining what it is they should be doing, and they are not in a position to determine that, because yes, we can still pull the plug. And
right.
What we have been doing, we have many sentient spaceships at this point. We have Jeeves, who used to be back in the day a warship, an admiral, and they're all people. We had this discussion with the guy who came to talk to us from the Portland Press Herald about he was having a really hard time understanding that you could have a person whose only manifestation was as an image on a screen, but who was still their own person, making their own decisions and deciding their own life. And it's part of our mandate as science fiction writers to shake you up and push you outside of your comfort zone and say, think about this. No, but a fellow science fiction writer had talked to me when I had been talking about the new AIs that we have in real life. And he said, no, you have to understand, they don't mean what we mean when we say AI.
Right. There's a difference between a sentient intelligence and a really sophisticated algorithm.
Yes.
Right?
The current AI programs are massive filters, and you give them a question, and they may have the programs may allow for more interpretation as they go along. Amazon and Google both have had programs for some time that could teach themselves how to play chess.
Right.
And you give them the rules, and they would build from without having everything built up. They built into it now. So now they're 40 moves ahead of a grandmaster. If you were to try to play in many positions. And some of those understood that what they were, quote, understood, were able to refine and simplify things. And they're still doing that in many of the places where they're using AIs to determine what's in this scent, or where are the likely next novas to happen. They're filtering through tremendous amounts of information very rapidly. So in effect, it feels like they have hunches, but they can't decide that they're not going to do this when they want to do something else. They don't have that kind of a thing, and it's a difficult
self-determination.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing for people who suddenly hear that there's AI, and it's not simply somebody wandering around in a robot suit saying, "Danger, Will Robinson."
Remember the automatons?
Yeah.
Back, in the 1800s, 1700s, they made these automatons.
The what now?
Chess automatons. Automatons. Chess playing automatons. No few of them were a guy under the table who moved the
like with a magnet or something.
But some of them are actual machines. There are still two machines in Sweden that you can go see, Clockwork Children. One draws, and the other one is writing a letter. And they are totally clockwork. They're great. So we've been trying to make human machines for a really long time.
And here I am trying to decide if I'm cheering that on, or or waiting for the inevitable demise of the human race thanks to our own creations, right? All right, so I want to talk about that AI in a little bit different direction now, because what's her name? Maggie is the name of the AI. But the most earthly name that we have in the entire book is the robot, of course. And there's a scene that points me toward a bit of morality in this book that I found really valuable and interesting, and wanted to get your take on it. So let's see. So Tokol has been appointed as a judge, and she gets to hand down judgment with these other judges at the end of the book on whether Maggie is sentient or not, because that's going to come with all these consequences for other judgments throughout the galaxy and with other potential AIs. Okay, so let's see. Give it thought before you answer, Tokol. Such a decision would set a precedent that would be of great advantage to others like Maggie as they arise, and it would alert the rest of the Byworld judges to look for them as well. Darug was right, Tokol knew. It would help the others, but Maggie was her first concern. Maggie, what do you think? And they go on and they make their decision. But just that line, Darug was right, Tokol knew. It would help the others, but Maggie was her first concern. And it's little moments like that I love to look for in a book that illustrate some of the morality that the author is getting at. It's going to be infinitely applicable based on somebody's personal experiences and what they're confronted with. But I like this idea of having a first concern as a moral starting point. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Right. And so there are going to be all sorts of conditions and what's the word I'm looking for?
Ramifications and things are going to be crazy.
Restrictions and
and what
exactly.
you have to do is extrapolate from the specific out.
Right, and so exactly. But having a starting point, a first concern. I love that phrase.
Yes,
Maggie's well-being was her first concern. I don't know. Do you guys do you have any moral lessons from this book akin to that, or do you want to riff on this one?
This is part of what I was saying, is that trying to say, I might not have brought it out, is Janet was running in this book, was running very close to to the personal throughout the book. It wasn't just a flashy story. She was working very close to, in almost all of it, she was running very close to, how does this make people feel? Why does somebody feel this way? So the book is really a book that has a whole lot to do about emotion. In the case of Maggie, the point is that Toko has developed a relationship that she's thinking of as parental almost. She's feeling that she's responsible. At the same time, Maggie is in fact learning and growing and achieving on her own. And
Maggie is immensely powerful, and Toko thinks of her as her kid, which is the balance of the relationship. They will both protect each other. Maggie has not yet come into the full understanding of what it means to be so powerful. She just does what she does. She is a child. She's learning.
Which is what they decide in the end to,
Right.
and she is
label her as a sentient child.
Right. And at the same time, it's the sentience permits the interpersonal. A long time ago, I owned a computer bulletin board system. In fact, Sharon and I had what was the largest computer BBS in the county, in our county. And I got calls 24 hours a day, and we'd get calls from Sweden from time to time. But these were all call-in situations. And if you don't have an understanding of how that worked back then, I'm sorry. It was pretty complicated, and
Look it up.
you may not have the Unix to understand the TIT, etc. interface. But one of the programs that I had started using as a filler, as it were,
that thing was weird.
Was it quote unquote was an AI. It was a program that was a chat program that could talk to you, and it would talk to you. And we had people call up just to fiddle around with it. It was one of the programs that they were Lisa or
something. Yeah, I don't remember
something. There were a number of programs being run at the time that, can you tell that this is a program and not a person? And
right,
I
the whole
lost
Turing test thing.
I had gone for an upgrade of the thing, and it did cost what was pretty expensive to me at the time, like $40 or $50, but we'd gotten the upgrade, and I had a guy woke me out of a sound sleep because I heard him yelling. We had because it was a phone call in. I had the speaker on just a little bit so I could check in to make sure I was hearing the connections happen properly. Ding, 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 and whatever. That was an 837 number. So you could kind of listen in. And so I got up and interrupted. And I said, "What's up?" And he cussed me out. He said, "You've been talking to me for 15 or 20 minutes. Why don't you let me do this on the program on the board right now? I want to go in and do this. And you're absolutely refusing, and you've never refused me before." Well, he'd been arguing with the chat program for
thinking it was you
for whatever. And in fact, he quit the board. He was positive that the conversational AI, the conversational program, was me. What makes you think that? I think that because you told me. I didn't tell you. Of course you did. Just go back there and there it was. It was so
it wasn't even a very good program. I mean, you would type something at it and it would ask you a leading question, and then you would get more information. What
makes you think that?
Yeah.
So like so much of science fiction, these AIs might be more illustrative of our intelligence level than their intelligence level.
And so since we had seen that at work, it helped us, I think, when we came to write write this kind of stuff. And I can't tell you where Janet came from hers, but she obviously had some computer background.
Extrapolative computers and espabilities were both, in the mix at that point.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that was interesting to us, and it was in our mix too.
Yes.
The quote unquote espabilities. Janet had a good way with words, and so she came up with serendipitist, which we have lately used, and that is somebody who either uses or is lucky.
Well,
in a
lucky
in a very strange way. The serendipitist in Hellspark is much more ordered than the Lux, which is what they're called in the Liaden universe, except when they're being formalized. The Lux are moved in the Liaden universe. The Lux are moved by their gift. The Lux moves them around. They're basically a pawn to their own gift. The character in Hellspark who is a serendipitist is merely lucky. She's fortunate. It doesn't. It does sort of push her around.
Yes, it does push her around. Okay. No, see, that's the thing. When you look at it in the long range, why was she where she was?
Why was she sick? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and so actually a similar background there. So really, I think Hellspark came from that, as I mentioned earlier, it came from that period where things were.
There was so much stuff.
And it was all new and exciting. The whole idea of the ESP and being able to maybe harness ESP. Well, some of the people in Hellspark recognized ESP abilities, and other ones deny it. And of course, you get the one character who's I'm not concerned with what you think you can do with your mind.
Yeah. Speaking of spoiling the end, but yeah.
So there was a whole lot of things going on around that same time, and Janet managed to pull many of them into one story and go, boom.
Well, and there's so many levels.
It's one of those stories. Drew McCaffrey from Inking Out Loud. He and I just read Blade of Tyshal, the second book in Matthew Stover's series. And I got to the end of the book and decided if anyone ever asked me what it was about, my answer was going to be everything.
Everything. No. Boy, that was a long time ago.
So it was. I had a similar experience reading this book, and Steve, you're kind of jarring that back into my mind. It's like, what is this book about? Well. Everything. Oh, it's only about human interaction and sapience and personhood and everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I want to. We've got a few minutes left in this conversation, and I want to take it one more different direction, and that is naming. Naming is a notoriously difficult art when you're writing speculative fiction and you need to come up with different cultures and different names. And in this case, she's trying to give you lots of different cultures and their interactions. And I'll be honest, much of the time it didn't quite land for me. This character's name or this number of inverted commas or dashes or titles and all that stuff. It was pretty overwhelming, especially at first. However, there was one that I thought was absolutely genius, and that was the name of the potentially sapient species on this planet that they're on. Lasty, right? Do you remember the name?
The species.
Is that how she pronounced it?
Actually, there were different pronunciations. They give you different pronunciations in English and in Dutch, and it comes from the Dutch, and it means. Even there, no, it doesn't.
Okay.
Even there with the what does it mean? It's used as dream. It's used as fairy tale. It's used as this is all of these events. Like there are I can't remember it because I don't have the Dutch really. There are amusement parks that you go to that are it's like they're a sprucitorium or whatever, and there are and the combination of whether is this a dream, a fairy tale, a whatever.
What am I looking at here?
It's an imaginatorium. It's all of these things work together, and But that's where that comes from, and it's Dutch, and it's SPROO,
OOK.
whatever, and
JES, yes,
and you
Sprokus.
and
Sprokus, okay.
depending on whose pronunciation and etc. And that was well done, and that was another hint, in effect, of what was going on, because the creatures themselves, for many of the quote unquote Terran background, the human background, they were dreams or nightmares or fairy tales themselves. Those creatures were, because they had so much potential,
so different,
and they were so different. So that was an excellent choice, an excellent,
and especially if the question is as it is, are these creatures who are so very, very different sapient? Are they people? They look so different from all the rest of us.
Well, and it's, if we take the word, as you say, Steve, there are several translations that you could go with, but my favorite, and I dare say, my Dutch is not very strong, so I'll be honest. Listeners are welcome to send me an email. Please correct me. But fairy tale would probably be in the dictionary. That's your 1A.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are some other subcategories maybe that you could translate it as. Anyway, if that's the case, I love considering this question of you as a reader. You're reading this science fiction story. It's about these far-flung worlds and these odd cultures and whatnot. But the central question of the entire book is, are fairy tales special in some way that require us to treat them differently than we might, other stories or other things, legends and myths and things that we tell ourselves? What function do fairy tales serve? And how do we think about them? How do we treat them? Do we give them a special place in humanity's consideration? Right? What do you think? Fairy tales. I mean, obviously you're fiction authors, but do you think about fairy tales this deeply as much as she apparently did, or hopefully did? I think she did.
There's a whole thread, a whole discussion with the computer about the difference between fiction and reality, and how much can you depend on fiction to predict reality. And the computer Maggie is actually vindicated in the end by having taken advice from fiction, from romances, to figure something out. She came to the right conclusion. She used bad data, but she came to the right conclusion, which gives weight to the value of fiction and also of myth. Lily Carolan obviously is in touch with the mythic, and uses that to her own advantage and to improve the lives of her patients.
I did. I don't remember if Sharon talked about this the last time we spoke or not. Once upon a time, we were both in a writing class, and Sharon had come up with a story, and she turned it into the writing class, and the professor, who was wildly not involved with the students, because most of them were youngsters, and they were. And he was 18 to 24.
He was Iranian. This is a plot point. He was Iranian. The rest of us were, plain old Baltimore, Maryland kids.
And but he had been pretty much, running on neutral as far as we could tell. And we were getting by because we wrote, and we actually wrote, and we both had stories. And I'd already had stories published, I think, in Amazing by then. But we were able to be seen as having some craft. And Sharon brought this story in, and it was called
The Winter Consort. And we read it and went around in the circle and got to the professor, who actually stood up. He had never done this before. He stood up. He took up a piece of chalk and he went to the board and he said, "This is a wonderful retelling of Iranian fairy tale." And he began to teach the class. And that was magic.
But he said it's a wonderful retelling of an Iranian fairy tale. And it was
And I'm
Sharon's
like,
story.
it is?
Sharon's story based on listening
Awesome.
to a piece of music.
It was called The Winter Consort because a friend of mine had lent me an album by Paul Winter.
By Paul Winter.
And The Winter Consort was the name of the album. And I went, oh, I wonder what that's. Oh, wait, I have a story due anyway, so I should write about The Winter Consort.
And so there it was. The connections come from out there, and they fall in place. And the fact that there had been an Iranian fairy tale or folk tale about this was because it was dealing with people dealing with situations, and the emotion, the emotive portion, and not just the the catapult flung the rock. And so, well, with some of the kids that were in this thing, the fact that somebody got out of the car drunk was supposed to be a main telling point. So, it was a big change, and he just went lit right up, having recognized a source, even though he didn't know the source
Even though he
was
didn't,
musical.
but he was put on fire, so it was a good thing.
Yeah, it's we all light up when we see something in a story that we recognize, that we can connect to, and that's the beauty of having so many stories to choose from. In the last 50, 75, 100 years, I don't know how many millions of books have been published, all with the goal of finding the person that can connect to it. Well, I shouldn't say all. There are many books that are many books are written with other things in mind, I suppose, but the best ones are they're seeking their audience, right? All right. Well, let's start wrapping this conversation up. I want to ask you, just for your final thoughts, let's do a little sales pitch for those who are still listening, who are intrigued but maybe need a little push over the edge. You should go read Hellspark if you haven't yet. What would you tell a person to kind of elevator pitch, sell this book? Why should they read it? I mean, besides all of the reasons that we've already talked about for now.
We've told them.
Well, for many of the people that we deal with are already our readers. And they come to us, they refer to us in online. They say, Leon Miller, this Steve, Sharon, whatever. And the fact is that we have been managing to reach for some of these same points for about the same amount of time, actually. And so for somebody who comes to me and says, okay, I heard you say something about this, tell me more. It's a case of saying, this is simpatico. We think that if you like what the kind of things that we're doing, this will be something that will strike the chords of your heart. And you can't go much deeper than that, I guess.
Yeah. No, I love that. It's the purpose of the Author Shelf series is to let people get to know their favorite authors, or maybe some new authors to them, but get to know their favorite authors in a way that's different than your typical interview, right? And this kind of fits really neatly into that, where if I'm hearing you right, Steve, it's on one level recommendation. Hey, if you like us, you'll like this. Enjoy this book. But on another level, it's, hey, if you want to get to know us, get to know this book. We love this book, and it's been influential. Is that right?
That's true.
That is true, yes.
Sharon, any final thoughts on Hellspark?
Hellspark, it's a wonderful book. It has language. It has proximities. It has cultures. It has a murder mystery. It has the pin of high change. You can't get any better.
And we should point out that actually that if you're a fan of Star Trek.
Oh yes, Uhura's song by Janet Kagan, which is one of the better tie-ins.
She wrote that, and she was in the middle of writing Hellspark. Her house burnt down, and while she was trying to get things together, David Hartwell came to her and said, "What are you doing now?" And she said, "Well, this is what I've been doing. Here's what I'm trying to do." And he said, "I'd like to buy this." It's not done yet, so you'll have to finish it. And she said, yeah, but nothing is working. My writing's not happening. And he said, okay, I've got a book that needs to be written. Are you interested?
And she said, and Norman Spinrad came along about that time, Norman, an influential person, and said to her, this man is an editor. We're at a convention, do not make a deal with this man at the convention. And wandered off, and Janet said, well, okay, we both heard Norman. And Dave said yes, and then he brought her the Star Trek book. Do you want to write a Star Trek book? If the writing's not working, this has parameters, and it'll get you back into writing. And she agreed to do that, and then realized that she had directly contravened Norman's very good advice as not to talk to this man about a book.
But not only did she do that, she wrote several dozen other short stories. And there's more Mirabile, I think we've decided it is.
It's a collection.
It was eventually, that was the collection. And I think she had several dozen stories, that some of which never made it into there. They weren't related to that. And so it's not only Hellspark that you can be investigating, it's the entirety of her oeuvre that she had done many things, all of them informed with and we didn't manage to get to this, all of them informed with a lot of humor. Mm-hmm. A lot of humor. There was humor between the people. There were humor in the words chosen and puns and things. And yet, if you went through a series, they said, let's find all the puns, you could do that if you were a pun counter, but you don't have to. And some of them you don't realize until 2 days after you read it and said, oh,
is that what she meant? Yeah.
So there's a lot in the book.
Yeah. Well, it's as I say, one of those classic books about everything. Yes. So it's the other image that I often use is Luke Skywalker going into the cave on Dagobah, and he looks at Yoda and says, "What will I find in there?" And Yoda very solemnly says, "Only what you take with you." And it's a book like this feels a little bit like that. What do you want to get out of it? There's probably something in here that will, well, unless it's big space battle. Yeah. Right? Okay. So Steve let that cat out of the bag. There's no big space battles, so you won't get that. But all right. Well, Sharon and Steve, thank you so much for coming back on and choosing this book. This was one of those things I never would have picked up for myself. It just wasn't on my radar. Mm-hmm. And boy, am I glad that I read it. This is the other thing. This is my favorite thing. One of my favorite things about the Author Shelf series is reading stuff that I wouldn't have come across my radar. So thank you very much. And I do want to remind everybody before we go about Salvage Right, your latest book. So go check out Salvage Right. It's, gosh, number 20 something in the Liaden universe. 25. And then you've got another book coming out next. What'd you say?
We have
July?
A book coming out next June called Ribbon Dance.
Ribbon Dance. All right. So everybody be on the lookout for that. For old fans and now new fans of Sharon and Steve. So guys, thank you so much again for coming on.
Thank you.
It's good fun.
All right. And thanks everybody for listening. I will see you all next time.